This episode of Instant Analysis is brought to you by Platinum Storage Group and Real Estate Investments. For USCFootball.com, I'm Keely Eure here with Dan Weber for instant analysis of Day 12 of the Todd McNair NCAA trial. And after almost 7 years of suing the NCAA, Todd McNair got his day today. He took the stand. It was an emotional day. It was an interesting day. So far, we can kind of break it into the morning session and the afternoon session. The morning session was essentially Todd McNair getting a chance to explain the timeline of his coaching history, the timeline of his life. I thought Bruce Brolette, Todd McNair's lawyer, did a good job of having Todd McNair kind of introduce his personality, introduce who he is to the jury, and I think the jury was definitely captivated by Todd's story.
Yeah, that's the first thing that has them just, kind of sitting on the edge of their seat and taking notes and smiling and just totally engaged, which is what you would hope for. And Bruce, basically, on a day like today, he's so good at what he does, but the star of the day was Todd. Yeah. I mean, and here's Todd McNair, and we talked to him at the very beginning of this, and I was telling people, he said today what he told us when we were writing the very first story for USCFootball.com, Missteps on McNair, 7 years ago. Wow. Before he'd sued or anything. But he told the story the exact same way, same story. He did it just beautifully. The nice thing is, this is not a story you got to coach him over. This is his life. This is what he does. He did, how he does it. He was able to explain just so much of what happened and what it meant to him and where it took him and all of those things. It was you could not have done it better than Todd McNair did today.
Mm-hmm. One of the more notable things I thought to come out of the morning session was Todd McNair did a good job of explaining the context around USC football during the Reggie Bush era. He explained what that meant for him as a coach, as a national recruiting guy, what that meant for his job, and what that meant for seeing parents, seeing fans, and how that went into the Lloyd Lake picture, how many fans he said hi to, how it was a good explanation of how crazy USC football was at that time.
Well, and I think it made the NCAA look like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. I mean, to act like one photo means everything. And he would take you through, a weekend at the downtown Marriott, a USC home football weekend, with all the recruits in and all the parents of players you've recruited, all the people you meet, the fact that every USC player gets 4 tickets. And as he said, mom and dad would kind of be the same, but they'd always have somebody else with them, a couple of different people. And so you'd be meeting, and they said, and a lot of them wanted to take photos. Yeah, hundreds. And so you looked at what the NCAA did to make such a big deal out of a photo that was cropped and with 2 guys in the background, and it looked like, wow, maybe it wasn't that way. I just thought he really gave you a sense of being there. He does it, he did it just so effortlessly. And just like he was talking to the jury one-on-one, and they were asking him, well, what was this like and what was that like? And the contrast between what the NCAA, was saying and doing and how they acted and what, Todd said and did, I know it was pretty stark, and I'm thinking the jury probably picked up on that pretty well.
Mm-hmm. The afternoon session continued with Bruce Brolette asking Todd McNair what was the aftermath of the Committee on Infractions findings report, where Todd McNair got the 1-year show cause. And now the NCAA has been arguing, well, it was just a 1-year show cause. It wasn't as bad as the penalty that other coaches have gotten. But Todd McNair said the worst part wasn't the 1-year show cause. It was the stigma that surrounded his name with that Reggie Bush scandal. He said he was kind of ostracized after that, and he went through his whole kind of decline after that findings report came out.
Yeah, things we didn't know. I mean, he said that, his lawn got trashed, in Glendale, or his kid got harassed at school, at middle school, and he ended up having to take him off, social media. Yeah. And that he was, he did things like he drove for Uber and, he did explain all the ways in which he tried to get a job. And the NCAA had said, well, did you send out any resumes? Did you do any applications, whatever? And he made the point in his own career. You never do that. No one, no job he'd ever gotten, you do that. You got it through personal contacts, and with, you call somebody, they call you, and made it clear that he went to, some of the people he was closest to in his whole career, people who had coached him, people he'd coached with, people he'd played with, and for whatever reason, I didn't know this, he had actually signed a contract with the Arizona Cardinals to coach with his college coach, Bruce Arians. But the Cardinals hadn't signed it. And he talked about being, interviewed by the owner, Bill Bidwell, and who wanted to know about the dog, he called it the dog fighting, or the USC case. And then he didn't get the job. He said 4 or 5 times, of jobs that he got really close to, and then they fell through. He was real close to Matt Rule, who was a Temple coach, and then he's now the Baylor coach, and really good coach, and how, thought he had a job, with him, and, Matt was going into Temple. He's an All-American at Temple. He thought he had the job, and then it fell through. So the NCAA, I think, NCAA had tried to make the case that he just didn't even try to get a job. When you saw him talking about it today, that's a hard case to make if you're the NCAA.
Mm-hmm. So Bruce Brule finished with about 45 minutes left in the day. So Costa, the NCAA lawyer, took over. With how engaging Todd McNair was today, we kind of all wondered, well, how is this cross-examination? How is that going to go? How did Costa go with it?
I was saying just before, it's like, you're a mechanic at the airport and you walked into the propeller of a plane.
Not the best analogy.
He challenged Todd on Todd's, expertise. And he said, well, you said here, when we asked you, Reggie Bush is really focused and Reggie Bush is, but he said, today you said Reggie was maybe a little selfish, or you said Reggie.
Well, sorry, we can get it. So what happened is that explaining why Todd McNair had called Reggie Bush so many times, Todd McNair explained that Reggie really wasn't a student of the game. He had that talent, but if he had a play, he couldn't really tell you what he did in that play. And so he was explaining, well, the way I coach my players is I'll send them voicemails of things that they need to work on when I'm watching game tape.
Yeah, right. That was really good because he said, I'm watching tape. They're already gone to dinner and they're heading out and whatever, and I'm watching tape. And I realized, Reggie, you could have done this. So I'll call him right away and say, I'm watching this. Here's something you could do. And that's wonderful coaching. That's coaching built into each player and what they could do. And we made an interesting point that Lendale White was much more of a book guy and much more of a paper guy and much more of a concept guy than Reggie was. I don't think we even all knew that. But he explained it. The nuances of how he was dealing with Reggie, and he's getting challenged by somebody who probably should have never challenged him on that subject.
Yeah, so what Costa challenged Todd McNair on was in an earlier deposition or interview with NCAA, I'm not sure. It was the interview with NCAA. He said that Reggie Bush was a very focused player. And so what Costa did is he compared focused and student of the game, that Reggie wasn't a student of the game. He kind of thought they were synonymous, and Todd McNair said, well, they're not.
Not at all. And Todd explained it really well. He said Reggie was focused on Reggie's life and what was good for Reggie. He stayed, he was a good student because you needed to be a student. He he worked really hard, 6:30 every day in the weight room. He was a guy who didn't let, you're that age. Some guys let girls get more of their life than they should be. Said he didn't do that. He was very focused on what he needed to do to be the best player he could be, and what he needed to do in his life. And Costa wouldn't let it go, and he went back there. And finally, Todd said, "This is a culture of clashes," he said.
A clash of cultures.
A clash of cultures, I'm sorry. And he said, you haven't played, I have played football, you haven't. And he basically said, you can't possibly understand what I'm telling you because it's about football and relationships and all of that, and you just aren't going to understand it. And Costa probably at that point should have said, okay, and just go away. but he returned to a couple of other familiar themes that he shouldn't have returned to.
Yeah, so then after that happened, Costa returned to the phone calls, the 599 phone calls to Reggie Bush. And so how did that play out with using student of the game against Todd McNair in regards to the phone calls?
Well, Todd explained how he, why he called Reggie and how many times he called him. And the NCAA attorney says, but I know when we first interviewed you, Coach Joe Henningmeyer, one of the co-lead investigators, said it was 330 phone calls. But then they went and took another look at it, it was 594. And Bruce, asked Todd, and also points out that Todd went through the calls and said, Todd, how many phone calls did you come up with that weren't 1 minute or less? The kind that go to voicemail, the kind that don't go through, whatever. How many were there? And Todd says 105.
Yeah.
He said, over 15 months, Todd, how many phone calls is that? And he said, it's like 1.5 a week. Ooh, that's a whole different picture than the NCAA saying you made 599. So then, when Costa gets up on cross-examination, he's trying to go there again. And he said, well, you had a chance at the hearing. You could have brought that up at the appeals hearing too. Why didn't you bring that up? Why didn't you tell us? The question he asked was, why didn't you tell us we really screwed up all the numbers and what it meant? And Todd said, I trusted the NCAA. I trusted you to be fair. I trusted, those things weren't in contention. So I wasn't going there. I trusted that you would be fair in the way you were investigating me. And he left unsaid. And of course you weren't.
Well, and that was the interesting thing, because that was actually the last thing that was said before we broke. So you have the whole morning building up of Todd McNair's personality. He's engaging the jury. And then for some reason, Costa goes off after this petty semantic thing. It came off that way. And then you end with Todd McNair saying, I trusted the NCAA. I thought you guys were going to be fair. And that's the end of the day. Why would you go that route at the beginning of your cross-examination?
All I can think of is if you're, top of your class at Georgetown or Harvard or whatever, and you've never been to a football practice in your life, and everything is the word on the page, and you think, focus. And he says something that Reggie might have been, going out on a date, and he wasn't focused on recruiting, helping us recruit Percy Harvin. And Todd said, hey, Reggie's a little selfish. Reggie's focused on what's good for Reggie. Recruiting Percy Harvin, that didn't help Reggie. So, and he said, that's just the way Reggie is in his life. That's who Reggie is. And he was able to give you this nuanced answer about how focused he was on his own life and getting where he wanted to be. But that didn't mean that he had to be focused on what was good for Todd or what was good for USC recruiting. That wasn't who Reggie was. But for him to be able to explain that, and the way he understood it, and the way he thought about it, and the way he coached to it, and the way he made those phone calls to it, made Todd look like, man, this guy knows what he's talking about. And these guys, they're just trying to make him look bad, and they have no idea what they're talking about. And when you can get the other side to make your point, because it wouldn't be a big leap to say, okay, is that what they did in the NCAA hearing and the investigation? Were they trying to grab these little pieces of information, little word here, little word there, and try to use it against Todd? And he really didn't get a chance to explain himself? By what's happening today, you would probably say, yeah, that looks like it.
Mm-hmm. Going forward, the schedule tomorrow, one more day of this week. It'll probably take the full day for Costa to finish his cross-examination of Todd McNair. Do I even want to ask you what you're expecting for that?
The more I think about it, if you had maybe some real ex-football coaches on that NCAA legal staff, they'd probably be meeting right now and saying, don't ask that question, don't ask that question, don't ask that one. I don't know. Are they going to keep asking, and keep walking into propellers? I don't know. But
that analogy is not the best analogy.
I mean, it's like, I was thinking, how did Costa get out of the courtroom today after having been cut off at the knees? I mean, did they get a wheelchair for him? I mean, really.
This is not good. I'm going to wrap this up before we get too crazy. For Dan Weber, I'm Keely Eure. For more, check out uscfootball.com.